Okay, welcome back to Gary's Economics. Today's video is going to be about mental health. Okay, so when I decide to do these videos, I've got a really long Google Doc which has a list of all the subjects that I want to do a video about. And I've had one on that list about mental health and the relationship between mental health and the economy and mental health for a long time. And one of my friends is always telling me I need to make that video, but I've put it off for a long time, largely because firstly, I don't like to do videos on subjects that are not directly related to the economy, and I like to try and stay in my lane and be super economy focused. And secondly, because it felt a little bit, perhaps a bit personal, a bit indulgent. Anyone who's read my book will know that I've had problems with mental health in the past, and perhaps I was a little bit unwilling to be one of those typical guys on YouTube that starts talking about his own mental health in his videos. But I've decided to do it this week for a couple of reasons. The first one is, the last few months since I got back from being away, I've been doing a lot of videos about explaining why we need wealth taxes, how can you convince your friends that we need wealth taxes, and obviously really this whole channel is me trying to persuade you and me trying to persuade the public that we need wealth taxes. And the longer I've been doing that, especially the last couple of weeks, where you put out your arguments for wealth taxes and you see people coming back with their arguments why we shouldn't, the more I start to feel that in a way we're not really arguing about the economy at all. I think we're putting out this idea into the world. There's massive economic problems, we need to fix things, and often what we get back, I think, is kind of an emotional response. And I think the emotional response we get back when we send this message, the economy is collapsing, is a pretty understandable emotional response, which is that people are scared and people are worried, and they don't want the situation to be what I'm saying it is, which is that this situation is really bad, it's getting worse. The way to deal with it is to work together to fight against the richest and most powerful people in society, because that's scary. And I think really a lot of what I've been doing the last few months, these few years, trying to convince people we need wealth taxes in the economy. A lot of the problem we are having is actually about mental health and people who are scared about what's happening in the economy, and people who, because they are scared, are looking for simple solutions and are unwilling to engage with what we are saying. So I wanted to talk a bit about that. I wanted to talk about my relationship with that, because this is something that I went through when I first realized these things were happening. The second reason why I wanted to do it is because I myself have been having a little bit of a difficult time, especially the last, say, month or so, mental health wise, motivation wise. And I thought that meant it was a good time to talk about mental health, what it means for the economy, what it means for this channel, and what it means about how we fix things. And thirdly, I've been rereading one of my favorite books recently, which is this book here, Not Being Paid by Camus. He's dead. This is The Plague by Albert Camus. Camus is a French-Algerian author who wrote this really beautiful book about what it means to live in a collapsing society and what that does to us in our mental health. So yeah, we're going to talk about mental health today and how that affects the economy. All right, so the first point I want to make, which is that the crisis of mental health, which we're living in this country, in the US, across the world, and the crisis of the economy are super related in a way that should be really, really obvious, but for some reason is often ignored. So I went on Question Time this year, I think it was maybe in March, and the subject of mental health came up. There's lots of statistics showing that, especially for young people, like mental health is really deteriorating. Lots of people are stressed, lots of people are depressed. And we were asked, the panel, why do you think people are stressed and depressed? And one of the ladies on the panel said she thinks it's because of mobile phones and social media. And perhaps that is a part to play in it, but it was very frustrating for me because we live here in a society where it is increasingly impossible to do like simple things like buy a house and have security for a family, be able to get like a decent living environment. To get that, you need to work all the hours God sends, you need to get a really competitive degree. And I think it should be really, really obvious that a big part of the reason why people, especially young people, are having mental health problems is because it's increasingly impossible just to be able to afford the basics of life for most people. So I think we'll put up a little clip of me trying to convince the people on Question Time that mental health is not just because of phones and it's not just because of individual problems, but is related to societal problems. I think we need to talk about the unbelievably hostile circumstances young people face with regards to their economic futures. More and more and more young people growing up in poverty. But even aside from that, we've got people with jobs in London who are homeless. So that means if you're a young person, you know that even if you get an ordinary job, it's not going to be enough to buy a home. It's not going to be enough to have a family. So just doing the right thing, working and getting a job, it doesn't even guarantee you can feed your kids. You know, we have to look at this. And then obviously if you're a young person, you're thinking, well, if I don't get the best grades, and I don't get to the best university, then I'm not even going to be able to have a family. You know, what kind of world have we made here? You know, we need to look at we always look at the individual. This person has a mental health problem. This person has a mental health problem. It doesn't come out of nowhere. These people don't just suddenly get sick. My dad worked for the post office and he had a family and he bought a house and he has a retirement, he has a pension. Kids can't get that. Kids can't get that. Unless they make millions of pounds, they can't even have a family. It's ridiculous, you know. It's not just a problem for individuals, it's a societal problem. Oh. We need to make sure young people have economic opportunity. It's super, super, super frustrating when people treat mental health problems as if they're like a broken leg. Like you fucked up, you jumped off a building, you broke your leg, now you have a problem. These things are to do with society. If you create a society where people have security, where people can get good, quality, secure work, and that secure work will be able to provide them with the basics they need to support a family and to support a family with dignity, then a lot of people will be relatively happy and calm and relaxed. If you create a society like we live in now, I live in a city where people work full-time jobs and are homeless because they can't afford to pay rent. You know, never mind being able to do things like support a family with dignity, get financial security. People will feel insecure because they genuinely are insecure. And I think it's really, really important that we start viewing mental health problems, especially when they exist in societies where the economic conditions are deteriorating really quickly, as being related to the economy. So mental health and the economy are not unrelated. If you create an economy where people can live well, a lot of people will feel secure because they are secure. If you create an economy where it's very, very difficult to get security, people will feel insecure because they will be insecure. And this relates very much to my own personal story and the story of my book. So some of you might not have read my book or know my personal story. So I made most of my money in 2011 by betting that basically the economic crisis would last forever. That was just after the 2008 crisis. And what I bet on was that the economy, living standards for ordinary people would get worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And I bet on that again at the beginning of COVID 2020. So I'm somebody who has been very aware for a long time that living standards were going to fall. And a big part of the story of my book, especially the last section of my book, is very explicitly about depression and mental health. And that was me sort of trying to deal with this recent awareness that I had at a very young age. In 2011, I was 24, that living standards were going to get worse forever and that there would be big explosions in poverty in my country, in your country, in the Western world. And you'd get people who'd read the book asking me, you know, so how did you make your money? Oh, I made my money betting society would collapse. And then they say, but how did you fall into depression when you made so much money? And I think it would be like super interesting, really, that so many people sort of failed to recognize that knowing that the society you're in is collapsing and is going to collapse would have an effect on an individual's mental health. The little quote at the front of the book, I've got a couple. One of them is from the Japanese film director, Akira Kurosawa, saying, in a mad world, only the mad are sane. And this is basically about what I wanted in this was to point out the fact that the book is partially about me going mad. But is it a mad thing to do to go mad when you know you're in a society that is about to collapse? Yeah, that's really what I wanted to talk about in this video, because I think it's super relevant to our work trying to persuade people they need to take action on inequality. This question of what does it do to the individual when they realize they are in a society that is collapsing? The way that this crisis is often represented in the media or from politicians is kind of as what we call a recession, which means a couple of bad years, 1 bad year, 2 bad years, maybe if you're really unlucky, 3 bad years, and then things will start getting better again. But the reality is, unless you're in the top 10%, really this just gets worse and worse and worse and worse and worse for you. So my plan was like, well, listen, this is like a really big political opportunity because the political status quo works really, really badly for like 90% of the population. And that means we have a really good chance here to unite 90% of the population to push for something different. Like in a democracy, if you have a status quo, which is going to impoverish the kids and grandkids of 90% of the population, all you need to do is show them the truth that this is going to happen, and you'll be able to motivate them to demand something different from their politicians. And I think the problem with that plan is really a problem of mental health. And I'll explain why. So this concept that what we were actually in economically was a structural crisis of growing inequality, that the bottom 90% was having their wealth kind of aggressively sucked out by the top 1%, that is something that I realized in 2011 when I was working as a trader. At the time, my job was basically to predict and bet on the future strength of like nations. So the UK, the US, Europe, these kinds of things. And it's a funny job in a way, because if you think that the economy is going to be really bad and the economy turns out to be really bad, then you make money betting on terrible things. But that is your job. So it's this kind of strange job, which is slightly dehumanized in a way. Like if you think a bad thing's going to happen, your job is to bet that bad thing is going to happen. And you're kind of encouraged to think abstractly, step outside the box. And if you get it right, you make a ton of money, and nobody really questions like whether it's the right or the wrong thing to do. And it felt like a very natural thing to do for somebody who studied economics. So I did economics undergrad at the London School of Economics, and then went into an economic analysis job. Your job is to look at economies, analyze economies, make predictions, bet on those predictions. So when I first put this bet on, I didn't really on any conscious level think, what does it mean to bet on a collapsing economy? Like, I was a young person, this was my job, I was trying to make money, I put the bet on. And it wasn't really until the end of the year, that year, so this was 2011, at the end of the year when I got paid on the year, that I started to really think about, what does that mean? And to be honest, what you see in the sort of latter part of my book is a long period of me having this, what you might call like cognitive dissonance, which is one part of my brain knows. Well, I think the first thing to say is when you first put the bet on, you don't know for sure that you're right. It's kind of, you're confident enough to bet on it, but you're not sure it's going to happen. Then at the end of 2011, I was Citibank's most profitable trader in the year that year, based on betting society would collapse, and you get paid a ton of money. And I think that's probably where like part of you starts thinking, is that like, okay? Like, should that be the way the world works? Like, should you just be paid a ton of money if the world's going to collapse? Should you do anything about the economy collapsing? But I think this is really the big question, which was, you know, my plan is to show people the economy is collapsing and hope they will take action. But when I myself realized the economy was collapsing, it was a long time before I took action. And it started a sort of battle in myself where, first of all, you just kind of, you don't want to accept it. You don't want to, because I think if you were to accept it, it would demand action from you. So for me, as somebody who had made millions of pounds betting on society collapsing, I think there's a pretty obvious moral case to make to somebody like that. That is like, well, maybe you should stop the economy from collapsing. But obviously to do that, I would have had to quit my job, and I was making an enormous amount of money. That would be scary. Like, I worked really, really hard to get that job. I came from a poor background, so walking away from like such a well-paid job was a big thing. But also, like, what do you do? Like, how can you actually stop this? And you have these arguments towards the latter part of the book, where I'm sort of arguing with other guys at Citibank, my colleagues, saying maybe we should do something. There's one specific discussion with a guy who in the book is called Arthur, where I say to him, like, do you think we should do something about the collapsing economy? And he thinks I mean, like, do you think we should put a trade on? He just keeps saying, but you already put the trade on. And I keep saying, should we do something? And he just doesn't understand it. And I think what you kind of see here is basically when you confront somebody who is working really hard, lives a stressful life, has worked hard to get the job that they're in, or is struggling to put food on the table, anybody, you say, hey, society's collapsing, let's stop it. I think a very, very normal emotional human response is to say like, fuck you, I'm busy, I'm stressed, don't come and tell me we need to save the world because that's not my job. That's the job of the politicians. Other people should be doing that. And I think a lot of the pushback that we get, that I get, is basically from people who are kind of struggling emotionally with the same thing I struggled emotionally with for a long time, which was, oh, the society we live in is collapsing. What the do you do? And I think this kind of debate, which I had in my head or in my heart or in my body sort of in 2011, 2012, and I didn't finally quit that job until 2014, is to some degree the argument that we're having in society now. Because it was pretty clear to me by 2012 that what was going to happen was living standards would keep falling basically forever until we stopped them. But I don't think that became really obvious in wider society until maybe the last couple of years. I think you did start to see this understanding grow more and more and more. I think that's part of the reason why Brexit happened. I think that's part of the reason why Trump got elected, both the first time and the second time. Now we're sort of moving into this space where it becomes more and more obvious to everyone that society is collapsing forever. The economy is collapsing forever. And people as individuals need to basically decide, okay, what do I do with that? How do I deal with that? And this is where Camus comes in. So I think this book, Camus, French-Algerian author, he lived in France during the Nazi occupation of France, and he saw the rise of the Nazis in the mid-20th century. And the book is about an epidemic of plague in a city in Algeria. It's a metaphor for fascism and for the Nazis and the growth of Nazism in Europe. But what he talks about is when you live in this society that starts to collapse, how do people react to that, and how should people react to that? And in the book, what you see is basically most people just kind of freak the fuck out and kind of lose their minds. And I'm not going to criticize that response at all, because that's basically what happened to me. I had basically a breakdown when I realized society was collapsing. I realized it a long time before everybody else. I've had about 14 years to come to terms with it now. And you see some people become extremely religious, some people become extremely angry, some people become violent, some people become greedy, a lot of people become hedonistic. And I think it's super, super understandable, this as a reaction. And when I put my message out there into the world on the videos, saying, listen, if we don't take action, society is going to collapse, a lot of the responses I get back are basically, people will say, oh, the actual solution is Bitcoin. What you actually need to do is to print money. The problem is actually immigrants. The problem is actually foreigners. What I really hear is a lot of people saying, listen, I'm fucking stressed enough as it is. Don't you dare tell me that this is my problem and I need to fix it. The best example of that was I gave a speech at like a really fancy advertising company once. And I was on a panel and I did this thing that I do where I say, listen, actually, we have a fundamental problem of inequality. It's going to get worse and worse. If we don't take action, society will collapse. And a lady went up after me, and I think by all accounts, she was a very nice lady. And what she said was, listen, the economy is part of God's plan, and it's like nature. It's like the changing of the seasons. Sometimes it gets better and sometimes it gets worse. And this was very frustrating for me in this room full of rich people, because if these people can persuade themselves that inequality is part of God's plan, that sometimes it gets better and sometimes it gets worse, that is a very, very good way of convincing themselves that they don't need to take action. And I think a lot of what we are seeing at the moment is people starting to realize their society is collapsing and desperately trying to find a story to tell themselves, I'm going to be okay. I don't need to take action. I don't need to be responsible for fixing this. So the truth is, what we are selling here on this channel is the truth, but it's not the most promising choice, right? Because what we are saying is, we have a society-wide economic problem. The problem is being caused by the very rich. The people who are supposed to be fixing it, the politicians, the economists, are kind of incompetent, kind of a little bit bored. They're not going to fix it. The job and the responsibility falls on you, ordinary people, to unite together, to educate one another so that you can push back and fight against the richest and most powerful people in society. I think we have to accept that, especially in the very individualistic societies we live in here in the UK, US, that is not the most appealing message. And we're not the only guys selling a message about how do you fix this. There are a lot of other messages online that's saying there are other ways to fix your poverty. I'm going to show you one now from an Instagram account that I've been really enjoying lately. Listen to this.
Slaves worked all the hours they were awake for their entire lives. I think, like, if they can do it, so can I.
You know, Aldous Huxley once said that a really efficient totalitarian state would be one with slaves who do not have to be coerced because they love their servitude.
The reason I wanted to show you that is because as we move further and further and further into this collapsing economy, and more people lose their minds, people are going to look for ways to get out of this that they think can protect themselves. And I think one thing that is super interesting about this is one of the other big solutions that people are being sold is if you just work harder, if you work really hard, maybe you will survive the collapse of your whole economy. And I think it's really appealing in this post-Thatcher Reagan world. There was a quote which Jack, my cameraman, told me from Margaret Thatcher. She said, "Economics are the method. The object is to change the soul." And I think that maybe 50 or 60 years ago, we might have lived in countries where people understood that the best way to protect your interests from the rich is to work together. But as we have moved into a very sort of individualistic mindset, people have been increasingly convinced that the best way to protect yourself from the rich is to work really hard and to compete with other poor people. If you do that, if everybody does that, if everybody works really hard to be the best and lowest paid and hardest working slave, all you will do is push wages down incredibly quickly and impoverish yourself and everyone around you. The only way to fix this is to find ways to work together. Okay, so what do you do if you're in that situation? If you're in a society that is collapsing, the rich are taking everything, the 90% are being killed. The only real way to stop it is to try and unite that 90% somehow, or as many of it as you can. But you live in this phenomenally individualistic society. Okay, so I'll talk about what I did. And the truth is, you know, I kind of had a mental breakdown basically. And this is the story of the latter part of the book. I think it's quite beautifully written personally, but you can read it if you're interested. And I tried really hard to convince myself that this was not my problem. There's a side character in my book who I wanted to include more, but I didn't have space. There's a guy in the book he's called Hong. Really nice guy. Maybe not the best trader, but he did this amazing thing, which is he used to take like 30 sick days a year. And another guy who I used to work with called Billy had a little book where he used to record all of his sick days. That was on top of his 25 holiday days. And nobody got really pissed about this because he was such a nice guy. And he had managed to do this thing in his work where he had kind of emotionally detached himself from his work. And he wasn't making the most money as a trader, but he was a really nice guy. He was doing his job pretty well. And he had managed to be emotionally detached. And I used to sit on my desk on Citibank trading floor. And I used to look at this guy in the book, he's called Hong. This is the scene I wanted to include in the book. And I used to say to myself, why can't you just be more like Hong? Why can't you not give a shit about being the best trader, not give a shit about the world collapsing, just get paid your £500,000 a year and live a fucking good life? And I tried for a long time to ignore this sort of, I guess, this social responsibility to try and fix things. And then when I tried to speak to traders around me, you know, should we do things? They just sort of laughed, you know, because obviously you can't pick up the phone and speak to David Cameron and say this economy's collapsing. And they said it's impossible to do anything. And I told myself it was impossible to do anything. And the truth is, you know, I made this realization in 2011. I didn't quit till 2014. I tried really hard to not do anything about the collapsing economy. But eventually, the truth is, my body kind of made the decision for me. And I got more and more depressed and I got more and more sick. And I didn't really get better until I chose to quit that job and try and fucking do something. So personally, I think, and I think this is the message that Camus comes across in his book, in a society that is collapsing, the only way to be healthy and to be calm is to try to do something to stop that collapse. But the truth is, even when I did quit in 2014, I didn't work very aggressively at fixing the collapsing economy for a long time. This YouTube channel was started in 2020. So I haven't spoken much about the period between me quitting my job in 2014 and me starting this YouTube channel in 2020. And people who read my book, I kind of wanted to give the impression that I never really wanted to work for charity, and it was kind of like a game I was using to get out of the bank. But the truth is, that whole period, 2014 to 2020, I was working in trying to find ways to stop the economy from collapsing. And the first thing I did, which I think is kind of the logical thing to do if your plan is to try and do something about growing inequality, is I went and I researched the political left. It's a common conspiracy that I'm some sort of leftist, some massive communist. But the truth is, I was never on the political left, and I never voted for Labour at the point of leaving my job. But because I thought the problem was inequality, I assumed the political left would be the right place to go. And I started to research the political left, and I volunteered at some think tanks. And I met some great people who I do still talk to today. But I was actually often very, very frustrated at, number one, there was almost nobody working on inequality. And number two, there are a lot of sort of very posh, well-meaning people who didn't seem super, really actively concerned and aggressive about working really hard to try and fix inequality. And I think this is another sort of mental health wall you can hit when you try to fix things, and we see this a lot, which is people watch our videos, they become convinced, like I was convinced, and they're like, oh my God, I want to do something, I want to help. But they, similarly to me in that period of time, they don't know where to go, they don't know where to use their energy, they don't know how to actually take action. So this is your kind of next step from a mental health perspective, which is you've realized what's happening, you've had your freak out, you've gone mental for a bit, you've managed to calm yourself down, you're like, now I want to help, and you can't actually find a place to help. So I think with regards to this, we have this discussion quite a lot on the channel where we talk about should we get people to send letters to their MPs, or should we give them calls to action? Should we arrange a march? Should we arrange a rally? And I've always been on the side of, I don't want to arrange these kind of big grandstand events. What I wanted, because I don't want people to give everything, get super excited, and then burn themselves out because we haven't built those structures. So what I would say is, if you do want to help and you're in that sort of space, recognize it's a long-term battle, recognize it's not all on you. We are not able to give jobs and work to everybody who wants to support. What we would ask you to do is always watch and understand the videos, share the message, get good at explaining in a simple way that the reason the economy is getting worse is because of growing inequality, and just build that message. If you're an ordinary person, that's all we would ask from you. If you are somebody who is in some position of power, like you are on the political left or you are on the political right, I think you should be asking yourself, how can you create spaces for other people to get involved so that they can support this message? But the final big realization that I made in that period, when I was trying to figure out ways to fix it, was basically that the fire engines are not coming. So there are these institutions in society that are supposed to protect us from economic collapse, which are most obviously the politicians, but also the academic economists, institutions like central banks, which are full of economists that are supposed to protect your country's economy, things like the civil service, things like the media. These guys are all supposed to realize there is an economic collapse. And a big thing that I realized after leaving the bank is that basically these institutions are all kind of broken and not able to recognize that basically what is happening is being caused by inequality. And that was kind of the second big shocking realization for me. And it's also another big shocking realization, I think, to give to ordinary people. The truth is, the institutions that are supposed to protect your economy are not functioning. They're unable to to realize that inequality is the core problem. That's another thing which you need to sit and take a long breath and think about, because that means that if you are just a regular person, the responsibility to protect your family and your kids and your grandkids' future falls upon you. And that is another thing which is going to freak people out from a mental health perspective. But I think the way to deal with it is to understand it, to accept it, and to find some way that you can contribute to fixing things. Take it easy, don't work too hard, support us. If you are able to get yourself into a position of power, we really, really need to get this idea better understood amongst people like politicians, economic academics, economists, the media, civil servants. We need these think tanks. We need these people to understand better. If you do not deal with growing inequality, your society will collapse. And if you are working in one of those spaces or are able to work in one of those spaces, please try your best to spread that message so that people can understand it. So that brings us to where we are now, basically. The message that I want to send across is that the reality of the situation is really, really bad. That is a massive opportunity, because it is going to damage 90% of families in my country and your country. If we can unite those families, we can definitely create change politically. But it is a massive blow to tell people that that's going to happen. And we need to find ways to support each other to get people to understand what's happening and not freak the fuck out. And that's true for me as well, and it's true for you. Listen, I've known for 14 years now that our economy was going to collapse. And the truth is, like, for the last 3 years, I've known we had a really big opportunity to build something big here. I'm really proud of what we've built. I have probably pushed myself a bit too hard. I took 6-7 weeks off earlier this year, and I came back and I was really sort of gunning for it, ready to sort of go and hold the politicians to account. And I've been meeting people at think tanks. I've been speaking to politicians and celebrities and trying to build a bigger social media infrastructure for these sort of ideas. But for the last few weeks, I've been really struggling a little bit just to make videos, just to sort of find the creativity to make good videos. It's a funny thing for me, because my background is maths and economics, and I'm always really, really, really confident with the economics understanding. I'm really confident at trading. But this YouTube and also the book, it's not just about understanding the economy. A huge part of it is this kind of creative job of how do you package it? How do you make it compelling? How do you draw people in? And it's that kind of creative energy that I've been struggling a little bit with recently. And it's the first time that's ever really happened to me, to be honest. When I wrote the book, it was kind of amazing. Like it took a long time for me to figure out the shape of it. But once I had that, it just really flowed through. And for the last sort of 2-3 years, I've taken these big breaks, but I've felt really, really confident about the creative product we've been making. And especially the first half of this year, I thought the videos are amazing. And I really wanted to come back and really hit the ground running with videos. But I'm honestly just starting to feel like I'm a little bit running on empty. And that's been difficult for me. But I think I've got my plan for what I'm going to do. I'm going to mix up videos a bit. You might find this surprising. I hate talking to camera. And if you look at the older videos we used to do, I used to do a lot of videos where I would talk to my mate Simran, used to stand over here. And I found those videos way, way easier to make. I think I might need to basically reduce a little bit my shoot days and only do some to camera and do some off camera. I think I'm going to have to do that basically in order to slow things down. It's disappointing for me because I really feel like we're really getting close to building something. But I can only carry as much as I can carry. And basically I need you guys to do a little bit more. I need, especially if you are somebody who has influence in one of those spaces, the political left, the political right, government, politicians, media, civil servants, academia. I really need you guys to start carrying a bit more and pushing a bit more because I don't think I'm going to be able to keep pushing it as much as I have been the last few years. But I'm not going to take a break. We're going to keep shooting at least for another couple of months. Look, the strategy is simple. If we've got enough people We don't need individuals to throw themselves at the barricades. We don't need individuals to burn themselves out. Understand the message, spread it, bring people in. But we also need to build models of strength that aren't just about individualism, people being the best, people being richest. Because the problem is here is really quite simple. If we can find enough people in this country, in your country, who are willing to be unselfish enough that they don't prioritize just their interests, but they work together to build and spread a simple message, then their financial interests will be protected in the long run. If we are a country that is too selfish, that it cannot find enough people to protect their collective interests, then most people will be bankrupted. So it's kind of this beautiful irony in a way, which is if people are so blinded by their selfish material interests, then they will be materially bankrupted. But if enough people can stand together to work together to protect their joint material interests, then their material interests will be protected. So it's a battle in a sense for the soul of the country. I know which side I'm going to fight on. I hope you fight too. Yeah, I've mentioned Margaret Thatcher in this video, and she said once there is no such thing as society. I think what she meant by that was, it is the job of all of us to simply protect ourselves. The problem is, we are in a competition for resources here, and if we deal with this in a series of one-on-one battles, then basically the rich will take everything. So if we live in a society of individuals where nobody helps each other, where nobody protects each other, then who protects the poor from the rich? So that's it basically, my video on mental health. I think it's difficult to be mentally well when you're in a society that's falling apart, especially a society that tells us our individual responsibilities are only to ourselves, but makes it almost impossible for us to protect ourselves individually. I think the way for us to stay mentally healthy is to fight back, but to fight back in a way that is balanced. Don't burn yourself out. Support each other. You're going to need each other. All right, that's it for this week. We're going to do some more off-camera stuff, I think. I've got a couple of good ones coming up. One about how to build a wealth tax in terms of implementation, and one about why you need to forget about money. Yeah, we're going to try some new sort of video styles out. Let us know what you think when you see them. That's it. Thanks for your support. Tax Wealth Network. Thank you.